Moving on then to a couple other just brief housekeeping points. I'm sure we're all used to operating the various systems, but hopefully within Teams we've all used them previously. Can I ask that everyone switches their microphone on to mute when not speaking? It saves any background noise and interference. Everyone, I presume, knows how to use the toolbar. There's both, especially the chat and the hand, if you wish to speak, to raise that or to put a note in chat. Only on mute when you're speaking. And so I think that covers the bulk of everything. And remember that everything written in the chat function can be used as a public record. So any discussions should remain out with that, shall we say, because it remains on record. And can I also ask for patience as we work through it in case we have any instances of the technical aspects or our IT going wrong. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Welcome this morning. Eamon, first, any report for that? Apologies. I think we're all here.
So, through the chair, everybody's in attendance.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. Thank you. In that case, then, can we move on to item 3 on the agenda, the joint consultative report and the minute of the meeting on the 13th of February, a copy attached. I assume, Caroline, are you covering that?
Sorry, yes, I think that's just the minute from the JCC, Tony. Sorry, you're on mute, Tony.
That's the worst of it, trying to flip between them. Apologies, folks. Any issues arising from those minutes or any problems? Are we happy to note those as a record of the meeting? Okay, thank you. As always, silence means assent. So moving on to item 4 on the agenda, the Audit and Scrutiny Committee investigation on climate change. And can I ask, Maria Stewart, are you covering this?
Yes, thank you, Tony. Good morning. Can I express my thanks for being invited to present this report? The issue of climate change has been and will be brought into a sharper focus after yesterday's tragic events near Stonehaven and the continuing exceptionally hot weather in England and the hot weather, then flash floods in east and central Scotland. And can I add my own sympathy to that and that of the committee to the victims of yesterday's tragedy. I'd also like to pay tribute to the members of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee who attended either some or all of the meetings we had with the council officers. And I would like to, and also to these officers for the work that they did in relation to this investigation. But my main thanks should go to Charlie Lelou for carrying out the investigation and bringing it all together, and that of Linda Hutchison for all her work as Secretary to the Committee and bringing this report forward since Charlie left at the Council in March. Can I begin by briefly explaining my reasons for asking the Committee to investigate the issue of climate change? No matter your thoughts on this issue, this is something that is happening, and whether it's man-made phenomenon or a natural occurrence, if we as a council and individuals can do something to reduce our carbon emissions, then it is well worth doing. We have all heard the emotive language from such well-meaning people as Friends of the Earth, Greta Thunberg, etc., and have said, and whilst they all may be right, I always thought it better to follow the scientific evidence. There is no point in following a course of action that may be well-meaning and popular, but is counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve. Our investigation took place between November 2019 and February of this year, and it involved all departments of the council, including all the way up to CMT level. And also, and I have to say this is a very interesting visit to Iswell School and Family Centre to see and hear all the work that the children were involved in. And I'm sure that all the councillors would be impressed if they went to a visit for themselves with the work done at that centre, both with the children and by the children. And I have to thank both the teachers and children that showed us around. Can I also recommend that a visit to this centre would be well worthwhile to the Cabinet or any of the officers? As you can see, there are several recommendations that the committee have made, and we'd like to highlight a few, although it has to be said, given the timescale intervening events, some may be a little dated. The key recommendation of the committee is that the Council renew its climate change strategy with input from children and young people, but always remembering to keep a scientific base. It has been proposed that the Council set up a cross-party member officer working group, yet another, and the committee has suggested that the Council consider and strive to be carbon neutral by 2040. We're well aware that some councils are trying to become carbon neutral by 2025, some by 2030, but the committee decided in 2040 as it is eminently achievable, and given the events of the past 4 months, I think the committee have been prudent in setting an achievable target, and we're well aware that Andy Cahill and his team have done a lot of work on this already and are continuing to do so. As the Cabinet will be aware, there are further items in the climate change to come, so I have no intention of stealing other people's thunder, but there are a couple of things I'd like to point out. Council policy and single-use plastics with inputs from trade unions and young people. A recommendation that our schools continue with their excellent work in achieving green flag status, that we continue the programme of works to improve the energy efficiency of council housing stock and public buildings, and finally, it was suggested that the council adopt a protocol to plant a tree to represent every resident in East Renfrewshire, which personally I think is an excellent idea. Once again, many thanks for allowing me to present this report, and my thanks to Charlie and Linda for all the work. I'm quite happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Stuart, and thanks for taking this forward, because it is a subject which is going to impact on all of us, whether we like it or not in many respects. But hopefully, yes, I think there's a lot of good stuff in this report, and we very much appreciate the Audit and Scrutiny Committee coming up with this and bringing it forward. Can I bring in Councillor Lafferty? You wish to make a comment?
You're in mute, Alan.
Alan, you're still on mute. I'll see if I can remove. I don't know if I can remove it or. As always, IT.
If you just go to the bar in the middle of your screen.
Can you see the.
And click the microphone button off.
Yep, done that. I know that a lot of people seem to be having difficulty with this. Sometimes it just sometimes doesn't work.
And it won't let me put my hand down.
There you go.
Alan, you're here. You're with us.
Oh, you can hear me?
We can hear you now. Yes, that's you.
Well, make the most of it. Like yourself, Leader, I'd like to thank the convener of Audit and Scrutiny for the excellent amount of work they've put in on this subject. It certainly is a massive amount they've delivered. My only concern is we have to sort of try and prioritize. We can't do everything at the one time, and we try and prioritise and achieve realistically what we must achieve in this area of work. I know the director has already prepared a paper for the Cabinet, and we will have the opportunity to hear in detail his thoughts. But thanks for the Audit and Scrutiny Committee and Stuart for their work. Well done. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Lafferty. Are there any further comments? Nope, I don't see anything. On that note, are we happy then that we recommend that the Cabinet consider the Audit and Scrutiny Committee's report on its investigation on climate change, including the associated executive summary, and agree that a response should be prepared and that we work towards the targets that are outlined in it and the items in order to progress and take action on climate change as much as we possibly can. Are we happy to agree that report, colleagues? Yeah, thank you. Much appreciated. Again, moving on to item 5, and again, the climate change strategy and action plan moving forward. And I think, Mr. Cahill, Andy, are you ready for that? Yes. Okay, over to you.
Yeah, okay, I'll take the report as read. There's a huge amount of information is already contained within the Audit Committee report, the annex to it, and the scrutiny. So what this report basically does is just outlines a proposed approach for the development of a climate change strategy and action plan, particularly in view of the recommendations of the Audit Committee. The report contains quite a bit of information. Because it teams and flipping between screens, etc., I don't intend to go through it in a huge amount of detail. You know, everybody will know that some councils have already declared climate emergencies. I think in my discussions with the Audit Committee, we were quite clear that that didn't mean anything, and the Audit Committee preferred that we had clear, decisive, practical actions based on, I think, the term that Councillor Miller used was scientific evidence. Anyway, by way of background, the Climate Change Emissions Reduction Target Scotland Act sets us targets that has already been mentioned. This will be referred to in the Audit Committee report. You have to get to net zero on all greenhouse gases by 2045 at the very latest, and there are interim targets. So there are 7 greenhouse gases, one of which is carbon dioxide, which is the one that concerns us most, at least for the immediate level. The report also points out how we'll be judged about getting to net zero by 2040. So it takes 1990 baselines for carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, and 1995 baselines of the other ones. So once they are measured, what you have to do is calculate your emissions in relation to those. By way of background, we have a current statutory duty, as many members will remember, to report on climate change impact to the Scottish Government on an annual basis. Now that's dealt with in a separate report, the next one on the agenda, so I won't go into that in any great detail. What's worth knowing, though, is that the Scottish Government plans to bring forward secondary legislation soon that will change all the existing public sector climate change reporting requirements. They'll be much more onerous, and I suspect strongly they'll ask councils to state target years and also to produce evidence to demonstrate meeting the interim targets that are referred to in the report. The other point I was going to make was that our sustainability and strategy action plan expired, our current one, in 2018. Most of its content is now outdated. It's been absolutely superseded by changes in legislation, current thinking, good practice, all the rest, all the stuff that we're seeing around us. So I think most people will be aware of that. As we said in relation to the previous item, the Audit and Scrutiny Committee undertook a comprehensive investigation and analysis and came up with 24 recommendations. I think some of them, in addition to those identified by Councillor Miller, were key recommendations that were quite important for me. So they included creating a full-time post of climate change coordinator, renew the previous strategy and action plan, set an initial target of 2040 for becoming carbon neutral, ensure that the climate change impacts and all the sustainability stuff is reflected in how we put together capital projects, analyse capital projects and such like, and also to establish a cross-party elected member officer working group. In due course, I would propose, in response to Councillor Miller's recommendations, that I would seek to incorporate all of those within the new climate change and action plan, because we're all based on very, very practical things. So having the officer in place will now allow me to do that. I'll come on to that in a second. It's proposed that the strategy would focus on 3 key action areas: carbon reduction, carbon offsetting and adaptation. They're all in relation to carbon reduction for just now, but once we start work, we'll include the other greenhouse gases as well. In paragraph 17, I've given you just some practical examples. These are things that we talked about with the Audit and Scrutiny Committee, rather than notional things. They're outlined in paragraph 17, so we're looking at possibly reducing their property assets, better energy management, reduction in travel. That's all going to arise through COVID anyway. Innovative approaches to how we manage our fleet, and increased tree planting, which was one of the other ones, which is an offsetting measure. So the strategy and action plan that will build on existing activity and good practice, consider changes to current practices and service provision to take account of all the stuff we've talked about. And really importantly, it'll include consultation with all key services, customers that use them, residents and young people. I've already met, I can't remember the name of them, but the young people that came and presented to the council last year. and I've had a couple of meetings with them to talk about how we develop the strategy, and they've had a really, really good input into that. Also, we've identified, everybody will be aware of that there are opportunities that have arisen through how things have changed through COVID-19. So, for example, unintentional massive air pollution reduction. So how do you capture that and keep that? So there are things in there that are worth looking at. Really important point though is for us to establish the baseline on what needs to be measured, how we measure it, and state clearly specific actions and implement them that will be required to meet the target, the carbon neutrality date of 2014, and also the wider stuff. I make the point in here, and it's in the recommendations, that we propose to establish a cross-party elected member officer working group. Just to say, in conclusion, really, despite all the delays that we've all experienced in so many different areas caused by coronavirus, we've made really good progress in the background in beginning to put this together. I've commissioned specialist support and help to do the carbon measurement as a starting point, and to establish all our baselines, what we're emitting, what we're using. I've also got in place now, appointed, a dedicated climate change officer, which I think will make a massive difference to have that dedicated resource to be able to take all of this forward, because it's not anymore. I don't think climate change anymore can be a little part of somebody's job or a little part of lots of people's jobs. It needs a dedicated, coordinated resource that works on this constantly all the time and helps support the cross-party member officer working group. So in conclusion, there are no financial implications at this point in time. I'll just manage that within my existing budget, or insofar as I can. So I'm asking the Cabinet to approve the approach towards developing the climate change strategy and action plan, support, at least initially, the carbon neutral target of 2040. But once a climate change officer starts working on that, I might well be able to come back and bring that date forward quite substantially, but I can't until I have that information. There's no point in pretending. And also, I'm asking you to approve the proposal to establish the cross-party member officer working group. So that's a quick rattle through and a massive amount of information.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mr. Cahill. It is a huge amount of information, and thanks very much to everyone involved in bringing the paper forward and pulling together the information that we have and what we would like to achieve over the coming year. So much appreciated, especially during a very difficult period. To have brought this paper forward and done a huge amount of work on it is tantamount to the work that has been done by all our staff in every area over the last few months. Happy to open it up, colleagues, if anyone wishes to make any comments. Councillor O'Kane.
Thank you very much. I think just to welcome the report. Indeed, I think coming on the back of the previous report is very useful, because it shows actually, I think, the strength of will across the council, both in terms of audit and scrutiny and departments, and indeed ourselves here at Cabinet this morning. I think there are a number of really tangible things in there that Andy's outlined, which I think are to be supported and encouraged. I'm particularly glad to see an officer member working group to, I think, look at the political response and, of course, the practical response, if you like. I'm also glad to see that we've talked about consultation and talking to people out with the council, our residents, those who use our services, those in our community, about their thoughts and feelings on a lot of this. I noticed there's a specific mention in that paragraph about young people. And I suppose that's just my plea in all of this, is that climate change and the climate emergency, if you like, is serious for all of us, but it is particularly serious for our young people, because this is the world and the community that they will inherit in the future. And if we don't act now, things will be a lot worse for them. So I suppose my plea would be, can we, I think, seek to, perhaps in a way, at various points of the work of that group, is maybe involve young people, particularly through perhaps our MSYPs or through young person services. I think elected members have all met with MSYPs, and this has been really high up on their agenda. So I would be really keen that they're able to have a platform to speak to us, and that we're able to communicate back to them so that they can see that we are taking tangible action, but also so that we can be influenced and inspired by them and their ideas and kind of vision for the future as well. So I think if we can find a mechanism for that member of the working group to engage with young people at various points, I think that would be very helpful.
Thanks very much, Councillor Kane. I think there's some very valid points there to take that forward, and because it's right. We are simply the custodians just now, but younger people coming forward, we need to do as much as we can to ensure that they inherit a safer environment in the future. Councillor Bamford.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank Stuart for his excellent report and to Andy for the environment report. I was pleased to see a lot in it around the active travel and the infrastructure, because I think Roads Department, as part of Andy's team, have worked so hard, both Jane Corrie, John Shelton and John Marley, in terms of the spaces for people. They've put a huge amount into their 2 successful bids so far and trying to engage the public in this. And I think this has been one of the unintended consequences of all this, is that even yesterday I noticed out and about with all the kids going back to school, the numbers of kids and families walking to school and cycling to school. And I know this is a small part of the whole environment thing, but I just think if we capture these children at this age, I know my kids over the years guilted me into lots of things, and I think that's the way to go, because it is their future. But I just wanted to specifically mention roads, because I think they have been very, it's been a lot of work for them, and I know they're quite a small team in submitting the reports for the spaces for people, and yes, so thanks to them.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Bamford. Councillor Lafferty.
Thank you, Leader. I was just thinking, as some of the points that Councillor Miller made earlier, one in particular was a recent tragedy up in the Stonehaven area, where a landslide has knocked the train off the tracks. We've had these problems ourselves in East Renfrewshire. A few years ago at Neilston, a landslide came down and struck the train going to Kilmarnock. The driver was my brother, and he never drove a train after that. A horrendous experience. But if we have the political will, we can make achievements and progress. If we think how large a part coal played in our lives up to a few years ago, to the extent we don't generate electricity from coal anymore, we can, if there is a political will and the determination, to facilitate the expansion of footways and cycleways, to give our citizens an alternative to driving cars. I know that there's a lot of resources required and a lot of energy, but I would like to see us moving forward in that direction, encouraging people to use alternatives to car use. Thank you, Leader.
Well, thank you, Councillor Lafferty. Again, some very pertinent and valid comments. Okay, I don't see anyone else wishing to come in. On that note, are we happy to note that for the recommendations on this report, approve the proposed comprehensive approach to the development of a new climate change strategy and action plan, support the ambition for the Council to be carbon neutral by 2040 as a minimum target, and approve the proposal to establish a cross-party member officer working group to progress the climate change strategy and action plan. Are we happy to agree those recommendations, colleagues? Yep, thank you. Much appreciated. Moving on to item 6 on the agenda, and East Renfrewshire Council Climate Change Report for 2018-19. And again, Andy.
Thank you very much again. I think the really important report was the previous one, so I'll be very, very brief. This is to do with the public sector climate change reporting requirements, where we're required to report to the Scottish Government each year. Normally the reports are prepared and submitted around November, and a copy goes up to the Cabinet. The Scottish Government is keen to see councils actually formally approve or have sight of the annual report. So this is very much historical. It's for 2018-19. Come November, it got caught up in, we had staffing issues that just made it really difficult within the department because I was restructuring and there was wider other things going on. Then, of course, at the end of March, it got caught in the pandemic thing. Basically, the report just says it's focused on carbon monitoring and carbon reduction, and we report that to the Scottish Government. And we're doing really well, actually, given all the circumstances. I won't go through it in detail. You can see in paragraph 8, some of the things that we've actually achieved through LED lighting and various other things and replacement of old inefficient boilers. And paragraph 9 also refers to stuff that will be picked up through the financial year 1920, which we would report later to Scottish Government in November of this year, about seeking further CO2 emission reductions. So, for example, this year we're currently putting in LED light bulb installation to save us 49,000, 50,000 at 4 high schools in Thornley Bank. And we're also looking at the purchase of route optimization software, which will make all the routes driven by bin lorries and gritters and vans and all the rest of it even more effective. So really all I'm just saying is that it demonstrates, the report does demonstrate, albeit quite historically for 1819, that we are well on track to doing pretty well about our carbon emissions. But overall, this is all for noting and is superseded by the previous report, which I think is the important one. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Cahill. Happy to open it up for any discussion. Councillor Lafferty, I note that your hand is still raised. Are you wishing to comment on this report, or was it from the previous one? Oh, you're still on mute.
Hear me?
Yeah, that's you.
Yeah, there's a comment there about inefficient old boilers. I hope that wasn't directed to any particular elected members, Mr. Cahill. Thank you.
Certainly not.
Okay, yeah, thanks again, Mr. Cahill. I think it is, again, a comprehensive report to show where the work that has already been done and what we are doing and is already in progress, and that's certainly much appreciated and ties in effectively with the previous reports that we've just had. Looking at the report, colleagues, I'll be happy then to note the report for the Council's 2018-19 Climate Change Report to Scottish Ministers. Great, thank you. Moving on, colleagues, item 7 on the agenda is the freedom of information and the Council performance for the period of January 19 to March 20. And I presume, Lorraine, are you covering this?
It's Craig Geddes is on the call and he'll be able to give us a summary.
Okay, welcome, Craig, and happy to hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
This report presents a statistical summary of the information requests received by the Council over the last financial year. This is the 16th annual report since the legislation came into force in 2004. Excuse me. The number of requests received under FOI and associated environmental information regulations is down on the peak of the last 2 years. In the period under question, we received 1,257 requests. Still a lot more than in the years before the last two, but as I said, down on that peak. The origin of the requests, both in terms of the category of requester and the location of the requester, remains broadly consistent with previous years. About 1 in 6 requests comes from businesses, 1 in 8 from the media, most of the rest from individuals. Approximately 1/5 of the requests come from people within East Renfrewshire, and most of the rest from Firth of East Ren, but within Scotland. Performance in dealing with FOI requests across the Council was down this year, with 82% of requests answered within the statutory timescale, compared to 85% in each of the previous years. As in previous years, the considerable majority of requests, 83%, were answered in full, with most of the rest refused, simply because the information was not held or because it was available elsewhere. In about 2% of requests, the applicant asked the Chief Solicitor to review, and 3 of these review determinations were subsequently referred to by the applicant to the Scottish Information Commissioner. There are no financial or other considerations associated with the report. So it's really just for noting, but I'm happy to take any questions that Cabinet might have.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Craig, and thanks very much for bringing the report forward. It's interesting to note, I think, in terms of what, yeah, it's good to see that the numbers are down in terms of the report, but it's also very interesting to note that the attraction that we seem to generate from out with the area. I note that out with East Renfrewshire, but within Scotland, we attract 48% of our requests, and indeed from out with Scotland, 34%, which seems incredibly high. So I can only assume that we're doing something right when there is such interest both across Scotland and beyond these shores. Happy to open it up for any comments. No, on that basis then, colleagues, as I say, thanks very much for the report, Craig. Are we therefore happy to note the content of the report? Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Moving on to item 8 on the agenda, and the Local Child Poverty Action Group second year report. And I think both Caroline, Brian and Michael and Claire and their contributions to this report. So happy to hand over to you, Caroline, initially for this report.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I think as the covering report says, the Child Poverty Scotland Act in 2017 puts a duty on us as a council and also the health boards to produce this report each year. And this is our second Child Poverty Action Report. The last one was published in June last year, and this one's slightly delayed due to the COVID response from June till August. It is worth emphasising at the outset here that this report mainly focuses on the pre-COVID period up until March 20. But forward looking, as we look to the year ahead, it will be very much focused. When we talk about poverty and the impact of poverty, it's going to be very much focused on the post-COVID world and the whole renewal agenda that we are talking about very actively. So to set a wee bit of context, we estimate that East Renfrewshire has 3,600 children and young people that live in low-income families. So that's about 16% of all the children in East Renfrewshire. 1,430 children live in out-of-work households that are claiming benefits. It's worth noting that our proportion of children is lower than the Scottish average, but that certainly does not mean that we are complacent or taking a kind of less than active approach to addressing the issues. The report focuses, as it did last year, the report focuses on 3 key areas. These areas are set nationally by Scottish Government, but they are considered to be the key drivers of poverty. That is increasing income from social security and benefits, increasing income from employment, and reducing the cost of living for families. So those are the 3 main areas that we are focused on. And as Chair said, we have Brian and Michael here, and we also have Kay, who are doing an enormous amount of work in leading these areas for us. I won't go into all of the detail on the report, but it does highlight a range of good progress over the last year up to pre-COVID. It kind of gives some details about the employability programmes where they've been targeted very much at parents, low income in work parents, and also the advice that we've been providing, the financial wellbeing advice for parents, and the training programs that we've done with health visitors, with Family First Partnership, with the school nurses, to make them aware of the money advice and support that is available for families. And we've also seen over 775 new Best Start grants given out to new East Renfrewshire parents. I think an interesting point to highlight to Cabinet is that for this report this year, we've actually had some engagement with parents and with young people with lived experience of poverty. And that's not an easy thing to do, and it needs to be handled very sensitively. And indeed, I believe it has been by our staff. We were really keen that their lived experience shaped what we do in these reports and these action plans. So we met with a focus group of parents in our localities. We also spoke to our care experienced young people on our champions board. And we also talked to a social work Healing Together support group, just to try and understand the world from their perspective and how they experience it and how that impacts on them. So this report sets out our actions for what we will do next, but it is worth saying that this is not set in stone. We are very much, as you know, in the recovery phase, and we do anticipate, you know, a lot of further development of this approach between ourselves, the council, the health board and our other partners as we develop our renewal plans. And you know that we're having these discussions in the member officer working group, and indeed I think in the next meeting or the one after that of the working group, we want to spend a little bit of time focusing on this. So it's just to reassure members that the plans that are there are not set in stone, and they will continue to evolve and develop. But as I say, we've got Michael and Brian here as well, who have, you know, done a lot of work with Kay and with Claire on pulling this report together. But happy to, you know, pass back to you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Innes. Yes, this is a very comprehensive report, and you know, in fact, we discussed it yesterday at our integrated joint board as well, and clearly the outcome was very well received. It's a report which is challenging. Because we all know the difficulties, we know the impact that particularly child poverty can have on that child's outcomes in later life. So it's a very detrimental impact, and we're more than aware of that, and we're trying to address many of those issues that cause that. But we know that child poverty is damaging and costly also to the wider economy, and again that's a problem that builds up and would be one that's very significant in the future if that continues. So I think we're all committed, and I'm sure I speak for everyone across the authority, to dealing with the aspect of child poverty across the authority. Happy to open it up, colleagues, just now for any further comments. Anyone that wants to come in? Councillor Bamforth.
Thank you, Chair. Like you said, yesterday we discussed it quite extensively at the IGB, and Kay gave us some excellent feedback and background to it. And I know what you said, Caroline, around the lived experience, but that was one of the comments I think Kay will recall that some members made, that actually there needs to be more focus on the lived experience, more of a, you know, what do you want us to do, rather than this is what we'll do for you. And it's not a criticism at all, because I think it's an excellent report, and I think what we're proposing is good. However, it's just to let you know, as I'm sure Kay would have already let you know anyway, that was one of the questions that came up in the IGB yesterday, was could there be more lived experience? Could we engage more, which I know is difficult at the moment, but could we engage more with the communities to see what we can do more for them before we decide what we will do for them?
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Bamforth. Councillor Merrick.
Yeah, that's a very comprehensive report, and thank you for it. I don't know if you can hear me properly. I'm getting a bit of feedback here. Okay, so it's a very comprehensive report, and it's almost a simple strategy, but a very complicated way of doing it. So increasing income and reducing cost, that's just a model for lots of things. But the real worry is with the COVID stuff kicking in now, because that is going to have the effect of decreasing income and most likely to increase costs for people as well. So we're getting a double whammy with that coming along, and that's a big worry. But I know you said it's not set in stone and so on, so that's great. And the lived experience, absolutely, that's the way forward. I noticed the bit about using the data, but make it a person-centered, people-centered approach, because that is what will work best, almost individualizing the mass, as it were. So yeah, thank you very much for the report, and we'll see how things develop on the way ahead. But I'm always a bit fearful, because we already see that young people get hammered most. Young people and vulnerable seem to get hammered the most during any crisis, and we're in the middle of one of the biggest ones we've ever seen at the minute. And I also read somewhere recently that the poverty die is cast by the age of 2. So if you're 24 months old and you've lived in poverty for those 2 years, it's very difficult to come out of that. So thank you very much for the report, and it's extremely important.
Thanks very much, Councillor Merrick. Does anyone else wish to comment? In that case, can I also highlight one of the other things that I touched on yesterday was also our community planning partners. We have, as we've mentioned before, had a very good community planning partnership, and we've generally worked very well with our partners and with the voluntary sector across the authority. And I think despite this report only coming up until March, i.e. pre-lockdown, the fact that we had a very good organisation in place, that we had very good relationships, actually stood us well moving into the lockdown phase, because the difficulties that we faced were massive. And I think great credit has to go not only to our council officers and staff, but to all of the organisations that we work very closely with, who certainly stepped up to the plate to deliver services across what has been a very, very difficult period. And in fact, an unknown quantity of people came forward and supported our communities across the board. And there are issues within that, I think, that we want to harness going forward. And I know that the renewal group and recovery group will look at that. I know that next year, yes, there will be a lot of detrimental aspects highlighted because of the pandemic, but I'm sure we're in a good position to actually start to take those forward. And the relationships that have become even better, I would suggest, during the pandemic, if we can build on that, then it will certainly stand us in good stead for the future and moving forward. So I think credit has to go, not just for the work that was done prior to the pandemic, but since then, there are positive aspects that we can take from the pandemic, despite the many negatives that are there moving forward. So thanks very much, everyone involved in this report. It is cross-departmental. A huge number of people have played their part in it, and again, that's very much welcomed. And our specific thanks go out to everyone pulling this together, and indeed to our partners across the authority as well, and beyond, that have made all of the work that's highlighted within the report possible. Are we happy, colleagues, to approve the Local Child Poverty Action Report to meet the requirements of the Child Poverty Act of 2017? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Item 9 on our agenda is financial performance for the year ended 31st of March 2020. And can I hand over, Margaret, I assume you'll be giving us the details on this.
No, it's actually Barbara Clark, the Chief Accountant, is going to take us through a quick summary of this.
Apologies, Barbara. Happy to hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Peter. The report outlines the unaudited.
I think you're distant. Your sound is going, Barbara.
Right. Is that better?
That's better.
Better. Okay. The report outlines the unaudited financial results for 2019-20, comparing the outturned position with the final budgetary control statement made to the Cabinet in March, and confirms the financial results as emailed to all members back in June. Once again, the report demonstrates the continued excellent financial performance of the Council. The Council's financial affairs have again been well managed, with all general fund departments maintaining outturned spend within budget. The Council achieved an improved position to that budgeted for, with only 964,000 of the planned 4.3 million of reserves called upon, presenting an improved position of just over 3.3 million. The Council's non-earmarked general fund reserve has now got a balance of 9.59 million, representing 3.8% of the net revenue expenditure, which is slightly below the Council policy aim of 4%. Position reported at period 9 was an underspend of 1.6 million, and the improvement of 1.7 million by the year end reflects the additional efforts made by directors to reduce the net expenditure wherever possible. The main areas contributing to the additional underspend are staff vacancies, a reduction in procurement and utility costs, income levels higher than forecast towards the year end, less than expected demand for contingency funds, and final loan charge charges being less than forecast. The outturn position for 1920 will assist the Council in taking forward appropriate measures to address the significant financial difficulties and uncertainties in coming years. The housing revenue account recorded an operational surplus of 598,000, resulting in an accumulated HRA surplus balance carried forward of 2.3 million. The Cabinet is now invited to note the satisfactory outturn position for 1920 and note that once the audit has been completed, the final accounts will be submitted to a future meeting of the Council along with the Auditor's report. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Barbara, for that comprehensive report. Can I open it up to colleagues or any questions?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Danny, yeah.
Aye, it's okay if I come in now.
Yeah, on you go.
Just in regards, Tony, to the underspend, why is it every single financial year we've always got an underspend roughly in the region of 1 million to 1.8 million? Why can that not be built out, Tony? You know, obviously we sit in a budget strategy group, we take a lot of consensus cuts every single year. So surely something can be built in to the actual budget, you know, to, you know, make sure that underspend is built into the actual finances.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Devlin. Yeah, we do try. As you know, that we changed the reporting mechanisms so that information was brought on a regular basis to Cabinet. However, what we can't control is the money that we may generate, savings that may ultimately be made, and indeed changes that occur over the course of the year. Barbara has alluded to some of those. I don't know if she wants to come back in to explain the background to some of that.
Yes, thanks, Rita. The period 9 forecast would have been based on that position known at that time. It's very difficult to predict with staff vacancies and utility costs and the like when these bills are going to come in and what costs are incurred. So very often we have to go on what we have budgeted.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. Yeah, I think it highlights some of the issues that we face, you know, that there are unknown unknowns, if you like, as we move through the financial year. And it's certainly, in terms of it, the underspend is very small compared to our overall budget. So to try and get it right. But I do know, and we do accept, that we are working very hard, hence the changes that have been brought in to ensure that we try and get as close as possible to our expenditure year on year. I think the report is an extremely comprehensive. It's a good report. It puts us in a sound position. But what we do know is that that position has been altered significantly by the impact of the pandemic. And this year, we are likely to face some difficulties. So having been in a good position, it gives us some assurance that this year we will have some leeway in what we need to try and do to make our accounts balance at the end of 2020, 2021. Happy to open it up, colleagues, for other comments. Councillor Bamforth, do you wish to come in? No, your hand's still raised, as I'm asking. Mrs. McCrossan.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to point out that, as Councillor Devlin said, we have been trying to work to minimise the underspends in year for the last few years. We've been quite successful to tighten our budgets that way. But in the last 2 years in particular, during the year when we've been forecasting the outlook for the next year to come, we've realised that things are looking incredibly tough. And we've asked directors to actually put the brakes further on spending and delay expenditure and maximise underspends in year in the latter part of the year And I think partly that's what's resulting in continuing underspends. But as you said yourself, that is deliberately done to try to help us with the coming year.
Yeah. Thanks, Mrs. McCrossan. Any further comments? No, in that case, colleagues, I'll be happy to recommend note the outturn position compared to the previous budgetary control report, and note that once the audit has been completed, the final accounts will be submitted to a future meeting of the Council along with the external auditor's report. Thank you. Those recommendations are agreed. Thank you. Item 10, colleagues, is the East Renfrewshire Economic Renewal Key Actions for 2020-21. And can I pass over, I presume, Michael, are you covering this?
I'll cover it, Tony.
Or Andy, yes.
Yep. And basically the report just advises about the preparation by Michael and his team of economic recovery key actions that we've developed in response to the whole economic downturn. It's not a renewal plan at this stage or anything like that, so I could make that clear. I think I hardly need to remind members about all the unprecedented disruption to the local economy in so many different ways caused by the whole coronavirus issue. If you look at paragraph 4, I've listed some of the key high-level issues in relation to the local economy. I won't go through them all in detail, but I think if all of you have read them, they make for pretty grim reading, to say the least. Main things that will have impact on this, coming from this, the business grant scheme ended on 10th July, and that will almost certainly have an impact as that feeds through with the consequences, how that might affect businesses. We don't really know that for now, for this point in time. As you know, furlough ends in October 2020. Again, I don't know what the impact of that will be, but the report points out that and currently in East Renfrewshire, we've got nearly 12,000 employees, not council employees, obviously, that are on furlough. So there are implications there. So taking on board all the points in paragraph 4, I think there are three main themes that are beginning to emerge over which the council should be concerned. There are local businesses and the local economy is one. Employability and longer term inclusive economic growth are the other two. So the economic growth is in relation to things like the council's capital programme, its vision for the future, how we deal with City Deal and further investment. I do have to say though, just given some of the previous discussion, all of this needs to be considered in the context that economic development staffing and financial resources are really limited. We're all well aware of the report that was submitted in June to the council that outlined the seriousness of the financial situation facing the council. So it's not easy to try to be able to magic up resources to be able to deal with this, but it is an issue. Further down at paragraph 6, I've identified the impact on the East Renfrewshire labour market. It shows in paragraph 6 that they'll have the biggest impact on those on the lowest incomes and the least secure jobs, which is really, really, really concerning. I've also outlined the impact on the business community, which we're well aware of. Some businesses have closed, some are temporarily closed, some are struggling to open, all affected in different ways. The impact on our town centres, I'm flagging up there that we've been looking at that too. It was referred to in relation to a previous report. We put a bid in through the Spaces for People programme, and we're able to do some things about stopping queuing, better channeling of pedestrians, some cycleways, some walkways, that type of stuff, and maybe helping businesses in that sort of area. We've also been working really closely, Michael has and his team, with Corporate Community Services, Business Gateway, East Renfrewshire Chamber of Commerce, the 3 business improvement districts, to ensure that as far as possible mechanisms are put in place to help support some of those businesses. In fact, Michael's actually set up town centre business steering groups to assist in that respect. I've outlined paragraph 14 and 15, some of the key recovery actions that have been developed. That was also based on initial feedback from the recently established informal joint cross-party joint member officer renewal group. So basically the recovery actions are based around 3 phases. There's immediate, the short term obviously, and the medium term, and then the longer term. In paragraph 16, I've set out some of the key actions that have already been done, including business encouraging business startups, looking at reprofiling the new Green Law Business Centre to ensure the maximum positive impact, a shop local marketing campaign on place already, various other things, looking at bespoke active labour market interventions. In addition to all those, sorry, I should include review of procurement practice to ensure that the benefits are best to the local economy. In addition to that, Economic Development have also undertaken a local survey with the local business community and a local survey with local residents, both to help fully understand what is the impact, what is the actual impact, coming from their own mouths, basically, about the whole coronavirus issue. And they've also produced a business recovery toolkit to help businesses open up safely. That's all in place just now. What I'm pointing out in relation to the next steps is that once we've got once information is clearer and with better information regarding the impacts and can refine our actions and response much better, we'll probably come back with a more detailed and forward-looking economic recovery and renewal plan, which was made clear at the start. This is not what is in front of you, is not that at this point in time. We could look at things in terms of that, looking at accelerated economic infrastructure, investment. I mentioned earlier about city growth and all the rest of it sort of thing. Looking at amending our existing capital programmes and investment plans. In addition, in previous discussions, I think it was probably at the renewal group, the concept of community wealth building had been raised. And I don't know, I think some members are aware of it and maybe some are slightly less aware of it, but it's been gaining traction in Scotland over the last few years with increasing examples of other local authorities building community wealth building principles into all their activities. I'll just say a few words briefly about community wealth building. It's a kind of radical and intentional reorganisation of the local economy. And as I said, other councils have been doing that. The purpose is it tries to achieve social, economic and environmental justice at the same time as creating opportunity and all the rest of it. And some of that, you'll note, reflects back to the previous report by Caroline on child poverty. There's clear links, which is why Michael's here. Basically, it's a people-centred approach to local economic development. That's it in a nutshell. And it tries to redirect wealth back into the local economy and involves local people in that. There are five strategies or pillars from that constitute what community wealth building is about. If you go to paragraph 25, I won't go into any detail because I'll bring forward a future report. You can see what it's kind of about, gives you a flavour, but progressive procurement, fair employment and just labour markets, socially just use of land and property, shared ownership of the local economy, and financial power working for local places. So there's an opportunity there, I think, that we could look with the council and partners to have a more radical, innovative approach to help local residents faced with various issues such as underinvestment, poverty, wage stagnation, low productivity and inequalities of income and wealth. So what I'm saying, that's just a brief introduction because I've been asked so many times about it over the last month or so. So what I'll do is I'll bring forward a report to a future meeting of the Cabinet on community wealth building and ask you if you formally want to pursue that as an opportunity. Currently, as I pointed out earlier, I'm making most of those recovery actions are identified. I'm covering them through existing resources as best as can be. However, it might be that we're required to consider as a council, do we need to put further resources into this whole issue in the local economy? But I did highlight the financial concerns facing the council in that report to June. And I just add as a quick rider that Solace, the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives, and COSLA have both been lobbying the Scottish Government and made formal submissions to try to get further resources for business support and employability in its widest sense. And a response is still awaited in that. So until I know that position, I don't know the picture as a whole about what the possibilities of what additional things we could do. So really, for now, I'm just asking you to note note the key recovery actions that we've already put in place. Understand that I'm going to prepare a further report for you on community wealth building and also that I'm putting together a list of additional proposals that can be considered should the financial situation improve to allow that to happen. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cahill, and indeed thanks very much to Mr. McKernan as well and his team for bringing forward this report. As we can all see, colleagues, it does make for very grim reading. That said, can I thank Michael and his team for the interventions that have been made during the pandemic and during the lockdown, because a huge amount of work has been done to support businesses as quickly and as effectively as possible with the mechanisms that were made available to us. And I think great credit has to go to the team for ensuring that our businesses were supported throughout the last few months. And we are aware that despite this report being a grim read, that things will potentially get worse because as some of those interventions come to an end, whether it be the furlough scheme, etc., it is going to have a significant effect, and we are going to have to look at how we can manage and intervene to try and secure the employment and support our businesses as much as possible going forward. So clearly, there are a number of issues there, but happy to open it up initially to other colleagues who may wish to comment. Councillor Bamford.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Andy, for a very, very comprehensive, if sobering at times, report. And I'll echo what you said, Tony, about Michael and his team, about the speedy way they dealt with the business loans, because I think we were a lot better than most other local authorities in that respect. And I'm looking forward to seeing Andy's report on the community wealth building. But I'd like to ask Andy just some more detail around page 116C about the reconsider and reprofiling of the new Greenlaw Business Centre. I know when we went to see it, it's an outstanding building and provides lots of opportunities for locals. And I know there was a lot of interest in it from people locally. So I'm just wondering what reprofiling and repurposing of it means, and has the previous interest in it dropped off? Is that why they're having to do that?
Yeah, happy to answer that. Yeah, basically the whole coronavirus stalled the whole thing. There was a lot of interest in it. If you remember, there was a report I'd put up to Cabinet to say what type of people the preference would be to lease to have them as tenants. So all of that was put in place. We were ready to go with the marketing. We had everything in place, and then after the coronavirus thing struck, then it just paralysed it in so many different ways. And people are furloughed and all the rest of it, sort of thing, and they're not wanting to travel. They're working at home. There wasn't the same level of interest just in continuing to pursue that Greenlaw opportunity from local residents. And for all the reasons that you can understand, it affects everybody else that's been working under COVID. So since that time, it's been very clear to me that in many ways people no longer, and this is including employers, because I've been speaking to some of them and major developers that are employers. So for example, I was speaking to Taylor Wimpey yesterday, to their MD about it. The whole world is changed now with this working at home. It's never going to go back. And I think many people now, major employers are beginning to understand that, and they don't want people to come back. And some of them are having discussions now. They want out of Bath Street and St Vincent Street and all the places where they're paying top whack for central office accommodation or high prestige addresses, postal codes attached to them and all this sort of stuff. And they're looking more at thinking about how their own employees can work locally. Also, I've noticed in so many ways people aren't travelling and don't want to travel the same way that they did before. So I think there's possibly opportunities there for people, and we know this, that people that live within East Renfrewshire and the majority commute into Glasgow and other surrounding areas. And I think that this whole experience has shown many of those people, or indicates that from many of those people, they don't want to do that anymore. They want to live local, they want to work local, they want to shop local, and they want leisure and recreation local, and they want a whole new life. They don't want to sit in the M77 and the M8 anymore. So taking all that into account, I'm wondering how we could just readdress what our previous ideas were for the business centre and what our new ideas for it moving forward into the future, how we might want to adjust that offer to be able to go out and try and assess what interest is in the building, because now that people are beginning to end furlough, end the business grant scheme, etc., 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 that will lead to much more engagement now with our department through various interests. So I think it's probably better that we just step back just for a little bit and then look at what we're offering and what the idea of that was, and do we need to change it slightly just to address those issues in the new world that's arisen through coronavirus.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for that, Andy. Councillor Merrick.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks very much for that report, Andy and Michael. It's very insightful and captures a wee bit ahead of where lots of people are. And it is about, as you said there, Andy, I agree, it's about people's behaviour has changed and it won't go back for a host of reasons. But I wanted to talk just a wee bit about our local businesses, because in terms of community, our communities are changed now. People aren't interacting as much offline as they used to, and that in itself will lead to other behavioural changes, not all necessarily good. But our local businesses, where we're talking here about little cafes, restaurants and stuff like that in particular. So we've done a bit of that, support your local business. Is that having an impact? Is that helping? Because I get a lot of stuff from local businesses. They complain about the rates. They complain, you know, they're staying open and trying to play the game, as it were, but they're pulling in maybe 50 quid in the till in a day when they're trying to employ 2 people. And these are local people and so on. So I want to know if that support your local business is still working, or are we getting any traction with it, or are people too frightened yet to really support their local businesses as opposed to Amazon?
Okay, I think that might be helpful if I brought Michael McKernan in for that bit. Michael's more aware of what's happening on the street, so to speak.
Yeah, so although we haven't done anything formal in terms of measuring the increase in footfall within the town centres, anecdotally, like I'd probably say for like over the last week or two, there has been an increase in the number of people actually shopping within the local areas. So the feedback that we've received both from local businesses via the council's social media, and also just speaking to our guys as well, and also local businesses, they are very, very supportive of the Shop Local campaign, and it's something that they're looking to see increased activity around that area as well. And it's all about changing people's perception and also past shopping habits. You know, I know it's very easy to you know, go to Tesco or whatever, or you know, or shop online. But I think part of that campaign is then really sort of, you know, appealing to the wider East Wren population. You know, in order to keep these shops vibrant, then the people within East Wren and elsewhere have got to actually shop in these local establishments.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Merrick. Okay, does anyone else wish to come in and make any comments? No, I think to wind up the paper, again, expressing our thanks, and it was discussed at our renewal group, looking forward at our recovery and renewal, and as to how things might appear in the future, how things might pan out. There is clearly a lot of work going on, both from COSLA, Scottish Government level, and indeed with the UK Government, to try and look at the issues going forward. We know that significant support is going to be needed, not just for ordinary people. If you wish to create an economy, then people have to have the money to go out, whether it's to shop local or anything else. So there's a whole chain of events and support that is required. And I suppose one of the big concerns is, do we face a resurgence of the pandemic, of COVID? Obviously, a lot of work is going on to repress that as much as possible, in the hope that we don't need to go into a significant lockdown again, but it is always a risk that exists, certainly for the near future. And of course, on the back of that, there is also the looming aspect of Brexit and no deal. We already see the problems arising from that in that we no longer have European Social Fund money. We will no longer have European Regional Development money. And the harsh reality is that funding was used by all authorities to look at their employability and their training needs for the vast majority of us. And at a time when employability issues and training and potentially retraining is going to be a key part of the agenda of renewal and rebuilding, then those funds have been taken from us. There is supposed to be a shared prosperity fund, but unfortunately, there has been little evidence of that from Treasury, and certainly no evidence of how much of the funding that prosperity fund will replace going forward. That question has been asked both by Solace and COSLA, and indeed the Scottish Government, to try and find out what will be available to us and what can we then utilise and put in place. But unfortunately, it seems to continually get pushed into the long grass. Again, we know that from renewal, there is an opportunity to rebuild. We've touched on that in our view of poverty that we looked at earlier. We've looked at all of the aspects, whether it be green issues, and a lot of that going forward has potential, but we need to have the resources and the ability to make that work for us and to work for all of our citizens and improve everyone's well-being and opportunity. So I think there is potentially scope there. I think we recognise that. I'm quite certain we recognise that, as indeed does our recovery and renewal group. But we need appropriate resources in place to manage that going forward. And that's going to be, unfortunately, I suspect, one of the biggest barriers. But thank you very much for the report, everyone, for Andy, Michael. I'll be happy, colleagues, to note the development of the key economic recovery actions prepared with input from the recently established cross-party member officer renewal working group. Note that further reports regarding economic recovery and renewal and community wealth building will be submitted to the Cabinet in due course, and request that the Director of Environment prepare additional proposals for consideration by the Cabinet in relation to economic renewal and recovery for implementation should the Council's financial circumstances allow this. I'll be happy to approve all of those recommendations. Thank you very much, everyone, for your input and comments. Our last item on the agenda, roads resurfacing works programme for 2020-21. And I presume, Andy, are you covering this again?
Thank you. Yeah, so, main purpose of the report is really just to advise on our performance for 2019-20 in relation to the indicators that are collected nationally, but more importantly to approve the roads resurfacing works programme that's detailed in Appendix A of the report. If you look at paragraph 5, you can see that in relation to A-class roads from 2018 to 2019, we've improved, but we've improved and increased our lead even more from 17.2 to only 15.5 requiring resurfacing. For the B-class roads, we've moved up from 14 to 13. You can see again, it's quite a wee jump. C-class roads, we've moved from 17 to 16. From unclassifieds, we've moved from 26 to 22. And from our overall position in Scotland, which is calculated in all those taken together, we've moved from 27th to 18th. So that's a pretty serious performance improvement, if I could put it like that. And I'm absolutely delighted with it. And it just is testament to my road staff and to the way that Jane Corrie has tried to manage those programmes and related to them, to the indicators. You'll recall in February 2019, the Council, quite generously, donated an additional £15 million for £3 million per year over 5 years for roads investment. One of the points that I've made repeatedly, whilst we've got really good performance in our A and B class roads because we prioritise them, it means that the unclassified roads require significant works and they get left behind. Unclassified roads are those in housing developments and things like that, and the ones that attract the main complaints. However, because of the nature of this place, with the A-class roads and the through roads that run through, so for example, Rook and Glen, they always in the past have been prioritised. Anyway, so now what we're trying to do is to allocate and direct the £3 million towards the unclassified types of roads. So let me just get rid of this off my screen. So I've outlined a proposed roads works programme covering major carriageway and footway resurfacing. That's attached as Appendix A, sorry. This is, I have to say though, this is really challenging given the impact of coronavirus, both in my own department, on my road staff, and also on contractors who are still in many cases have their staff furloughed, are struggling to get back onto their feet, are working at 30% capability, etc. I've also got in place a new procurement framework for the coal tar testing that has to take place, which I've explained to the Cabinet before. So basically, in conclusion, I'm asking you to approve and allow me to try to get on and deliver Appendix A in terms of those roads that are much more focused on major resurfacing in unclassified areas, those that are high priority that we see in council estates, etc., rather than mainly potholing and patching in those areas in the past. So that's the underlying direction in relation to the carriageway resurfacing proposals and the footway ones that are attached. So I'm basically asking you to approve those, and I will endeavour my best to try to deliver on that for this financial year.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cahill, for that report. And again, as you say, I think it is an absolutely fantastic report. I think excellent progress has been made over recent years to improve our road network across the authority. Happy to take comments from others. Councillor Lafferty. Oh.
Thank you, Leader. Hear me? Yeah. It is certainly a very encouraging report, one that shows that the convener environment is not exerting any influence to get roadworks done in Busby, but I'm sure the Director can assure the Cabinet that the selection of these roads, and I'm sure we all have constituents that contact us regarding the condition of their street, that they are chosen on the basis of priority and condition of the roads. And yeah, leave it at that. But yes, I would want to join yourself and Mr. Cahill in our appreciation to our workforce on the roads and in other services delivered by Mr. Cahill. I'm sure we'll have further reports in the future.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Lafferty. Councillor Merrick. I'll bring you in a second, Danny. Yeah.
Right, no, just want to hear this.
Okay.
Councillor Merrick, yeah.
I don't know if you can hear me. I can't hear anybody, but I'll just talk. Okay. I heard that. Yeah, it's a great report. Congratulations to the department and the roads department in particular for doing this. And the trajectory is still improving, which is even better. And you're right, Andy, that it's the unclassified roads, and Councillor Lafferty also, they're the ones that people contact us about a lot. Nobody says, well done with your A and B roads, you know, what about the road outside my house, you know, that kind of thing. So this is good, and of course we do tell people that these are prioritised and so on, you know, and we do our best. And if we had an unending supply of money and workers, we would do them all, but it just doesn't like that in life. But thank you very much. It's a good report, and onward and upward.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Merrick. Councillor Bamford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to add my thanks to Jean Corrie and her team for doing an excellent job in getting us up to number 18, and I know she'll be aiming even higher than that. I'd like to ask a question about the extra $3 million a year that we agreed. Now, obviously, there's been 4 months of absolutely no roadworks, and then, as Andy said, you know, there's a substantial, there will be more delays because of road workers and materials themselves. If we don't spend all of that, our 3 million this year. Will we add it on to next year and spend perhaps 4 million next year? Or does it get added on to the very end, making it, instead of over 5 years, over 5.5 years? So that's my first question. The second question is, I know there are roads now, at least one, I'm not going to name it, quite a significant road around my ward where it was supposed to start in April, and I told residents that it would be starting in April because I was informed that would be well from April onwards. I can't say April, sorry. And it's not in the list. So I'm just wondering if some have been knocked off the list because they've been regraded in the since I think that was January, February, I spoke to residents. The third point I want to make is there are 3 roads mentioned in your appendix: Warnock Road, Kinloch Road and Douglas Drive, that are all designated Ward 5, and they're not Ward 5, they're all Ward 2. Just a typo. But I just thought I should point out that there's actually 3 less Ward 5 roads getting, and roads. One of them, Douglas Drive, is resurfacing of the pavement, but the other 2 are resurfacing of the roads, which are not Ward 5. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bamford. Happy to bring in first Margaret and then Andy back in. Margaret.
Hello there. Just to say, in terms of carrying forward any capital that's unspent in the current year, that will be a decision for members to take once we're pulling together the capital monitoring reports. As you know, with capital, the norm is that it automatically would roll forward into the next year, but we have to bear in mind whether we have the resource available in any one 12-month period to cope with all that extra work from the previous year. We don't at the moment have enough resource to do all the property repairs and catch them up in 1 year for the amount that's been delayed in the current year. And there's a report going up on capital monitoring to the next cabinet meeting that will talk about the impact of carry forward going into next year and how much it's feasible to catch up in the immediate 12 months that's coming behind. So to say that the roads will fall into the same category as that, but it's an option that you do have with capital.
Okay, thanks for that, Margaret. Mr. Cahill.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Margaret's answered that question. So the roads typo thing won't matter. Everybody knows where the road is. It must have got the word wrong. If Councillor Bamford just wants to drop me a one-liner email about the outstanding road, I'll deal with that offline. The main thing I was going to go back to is the point made by Councillor Lafferty about how the road programme is selected. And I would just direct members again, and I put this in every year, and it should be the stock answer that you have for any resident that approaches you. In paragraph 15, it is absolutely objective about how we put together that roads programme. It's based on the structural condition of the road or the footway, the usage that we calculate of the road or the footway, the cost of maintenance for the previous 3 years, the number of complaints received regarding the roadway, and also a slight element of geographical spread. So it is as objective as it possibly could be.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Mr. Cahill. Yeah, and I think credit to our roads team because they do a huge amount of work going out and ensuring that the roads that we target are roads that are very much needing to be repaired and need that support. Thanks very much again, everyone. Are we happy then with the recommendations that Council has to approve? Sorry, Danny. Yeah, Danny, you want to come in?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Tony.
Yeah.
Just a question in the unclassified roads. Does that include the roads that's still under the housing revenue account? And is there any moves afoot to put them back into the general fund because of the lack of investment?
No, that issue has been an outstanding one that the Cabinet's been aware of for many years, and it's never been resolved.
Yeah, I'm just talking about, is that the roads in the housing revenue account, are they classed as unclassified?
Some of them would be classed as unclassified, yes.
There will be a balance, I think, Danny. So, some will be still main roads.
Yeah, they're mainly in Barhead, but this has been floating about for probably 10, 15 years in regards to getting them back into the general fund so they can get some investment in them. Just basically, I'm asking, the Environment Department, is there any moves afoot to get them back into the general fund so they can get some investment in them?
No, that's never been progressed. At one point in time, there was an assessment made as to how much that would cost to get them up to an adoptable standard, because some of those were built to a lesser standard because of the arrangements that were in place before our time. And it was millions and millions and millions of pounds, and the Cabinet chose not to go down that route. However, I think there may be an opportunity in here to maybe look as part of the capital programme expenditure at some of those roads that are still held on the housing revenue account that might be able to get some investment put into them. I think that's something that could certainly be looked at, but we would look at that anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think the times came that, if you look at some of the roads, it's, under the housing revenue account, there's been no investment done in them for years, basically because the housing revenue account can't afford to invest in them. So we've got to get some, finance put into them, i.e. through the general fund, to bring them up to a state that the people are expecting of them.